Well, joining me now at the Future Renting Conference here in Cardiff is RLA Policy Manager John Stewart. And John, we're heading towards the end of the afternoon as we speak. And I think, first of all, when we have government here engaging with landlords, it really does create a buzz, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. We're very fortunate. We've had Justin Tomlinson, the Parliamentary Under-Secretary at Department of Work and Pensions from the UK government, giving an overview of where the government is with universal credit, managed migration and some of the process and policy issues that have been faced by landlords. And we're also welcoming Rebecca Evans for the second year, the Welsh Housing Minister, where we're going to learn a bit more about how the Welsh Government plans to tackle issues like landlords and agents being reluctant to let to tenants who are claiming benefits. Mm-hmm.
And indeed, it was great to hear Justin being so positive about the role that the RLA plays in talking to government and putting forward the views of landlords.
It's very important that we both reflect and represent our members' views when we're speaking to government. Clearly, we can tap into a huge amount of experience and opinion and practice. And if government are going to be making sensible policy, we need that information and that data from our members so we can go in and talk to government. We also have to be realistic about what government's trying to achieve, and governments very rarely overturn their main policy directions. Universal credit is an interesting issue. It has been around now for quite a while. There are clear principles that underlie universal credit that the government has stuck to quite doggedly, to be frank. We've seen some tinkering around the edges. We've seen some small changes responding to some of the issues that we've raised. More importantly, actually, we've seen the people who are responsible for delivering universal credit on the ground engaging and trying to sort out some of the more process-driven problems. So we have that engagement at both levels with the civil service, where we can go and deal with issues of process, but then with the government, where we take issues of policy. And I say we have to be pragmatic. Governments sometimes change policy, you sometimes get a dramatic U-turn, but more often than not, it's about trying to nudge them in a slightly different and more effective direction.
Indeed, and let's turn now to your presentation, because John was speaking today earlier at the conference. Now, you had the challenging task of giving landlords some insights into how Brexit might affect the private rented sector. So did you get out your crystal ball?
I think the first thing you have to accept with Brexit is that most people's views haven't really changed that much since the referendum. People who have been entrenched supporters of Brexit aren't suddenly waving the white flag and saying, oh, we must remain. And by and large, people who really support the European project, if you like, and European ideas, aren't suddenly saying, oh, well, we've lost the vote, we have to quit now. So, for a good half of people involved in the debate, their view on Brexit is very much set by their own political opinion. But the key to Brexit is, of course, is fundamentally nobody really knows what's going to happen. No country has actually left the European Union, let alone one as big and as influential as the UK. All we can do is look at some of the data that's happened since the Brexit vote, and economically that has not been very positive, to be honest. And in terms of migration, depending on your view, it's either been very positive, we've seen a slowdown in EU migration, or it's been negative, we're seeing less inflow of skilled workers from Europe, and indeed potentially a smaller pool of renters. And to give an idea of just how important EU citizens are in terms of the UK rental market, there's 2.28 million EU workers in the UK, not 2.28 million EU residents, that's people working in the UK at the moment. Over half of EU citizens rent in the private rented sector, and that's a bigger proportion actually than other immigrants and migrants to the UK. 80% of new migrants to the UK rent privately, and the European Union citizens account for over 10% of the total private rented sector market. So what happens to those people, what happens to their rights to stay and work and live in the UK is hugely important to the private rented sector, and particularly in those regions where you have large concentrations of EU workers, like London, East Anglia, universities, towns and cities.
Well, indeed, a lot of these issues are creating uncertainty for landlords because nobody really knows how it's all going to pan out. But one counter to uncertainty is education, and that is why these conferences have an increasingly important role going forwards, because they're going to almost help landlords de-risk being a landlord.
Indeed, and there's a huge amount of data out there. Some of it is conflicting data, and what we can do through our own research lab, our LA Peril, through our e-news and bulletins that we send out to members, and through events like this, is we can distill those facts into the key information that landlords need to make decisions, or at least present scenarios and options that landlords can look at and see what fits their business model best, or what fits their mind view best, to be honest, because people will, when presented with the same information, make different decisions, and that's quite legitimate. And some people are more risk averse than others. And for some people, Brexit will be a disaster. For other people, will view it as a huge opportunity. And both could be right, and depending on your business model, depending on who you rent to, and depending on how much risk you're prepared to take.
Indeed, and we've seen that we've had about 200 landlords here today, and it's just great to see the members turning out in force, particularly at a time when there's a lot of should I say, media negativity around landlords, anti-landlord rhetoric. I think this event goes a long way to showing that there are good landlords committed to providing good levels of service and accommodation to their tenants. This is the professional face of landlordism that we see here today.
Absolutely. It's hugely frustrating to see the narrative round about landlords in the private rented sector, and agents, to be honest, set by the worst in the sector. Yeah. And whether that's the worst landlords who are featured constantly by campaigning groups who want to make a point, and we can't deny the fact there are criminals in the sector letting appalling properties, and while they are there, they will continue to be highlighted, because that is better news than a landlord helping and supporting a tenant through, for example, a universal credit claim. But likewise, within the landlord community, we see the other side, where the focus is on the very worst tenants who don't pay their rent, who trash properties, who undertake criminal activities. And really, it's really important that the middle ground is heard. I mean, at the end of the day, that's where the vast majority of the private rented sector is, with good landlords, with satisfied tenants, with good properties where the rent is being paid. And we need to ensure the voice of that section of the market is the dominant voice, and we have to push the bad news stories and the criminals to the margins, out of the sector, and ideally out of the media.
Indeed. So just as we finish, John, what do you hope landlords will take away from the event today? Because with so much negativity around, it can be hard to see a way forwards, to see some positivity. But actually, as you've just said, that there will always be opportunity for those that seek to understand it and look for it.
Well, I hope people will take away today a good event where they'll have a chance to network and talk to other landlords who will learn from each other, learn that there is support and advice out there, that there is good information out there to help you through it, and that no matter how, again, things are sometimes portrayed, that while you might not like what government is doing, government does listen. Government doesn't set out to make bad policy or to victimise particular groups, but government has tough decisions to make, and they impact some sectors more than others. But the fact we've had ministers here positively engaging with the RLA, with our members, with other partners, means that government is at least willing to listen. They might not always give you the answers you want, but we do have to continue to engage.
Indeed. Well, thank you so much for joining me here on the interview, and we'll have more action from the Future Renting Conference here in Cardiff, so skip along to the next video. Thank you very much, John.